The first thing I think it's really important to acknowledge is that anti-Semitism is real, and it's a problem, and it exists right here in the United States. Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, had his house firebombed the night of the Passover Seder right into his dining room. Not an accident. In Boulder, Colorado, there was a terrorist attack with Molotov cocktails on a local march of Jewish Americans. Not an accident. These things are real, and they have to be taken very seriously. That said, there's a huge difference between terrorist attacks on Jewish Americans and student advocacy that's strongly pro-Palestine that can sometimes cross over into anti-Semitism. What Harvard has tried to do is make it really, really clear that just like our rules say, we will not tolerate discrimination or harassment of bullying on the basis of racism or sexism or homophobia, we similarly do not tolerate discrimination, harassment, or bullying on the basis of anti-Semitism. That's what those rules do say, and that's what they should say. And so Harvard has done a much better job over the last year and change of clarifying those rules, of telling everyone what they are, and also of enforcing them as appropriate. So I think that's how we're addressing the issue. I will also say that, I've spent a lot of my life in and around universities and a lot of it in and around Harvard. I've been teaching here for nearly 20 years. And I myself, despite being openly identified as Jewish, I wore a yarmulke when I was in college every day. I run a program on Jewish and Israeli law. I'm not hiding. I've never, not even once, personally experienced anti-Semitism on this campus. It's not to say that it hasn't happened to other people, but it is to say that I think it's pretty unusual in that regard. And that, I think, is something that is easily lost in this debate. And the last point I would just make is, this is Donald Trump we're talking about here. There is a flavor of using anti-Semitism as an excuse to go after Harvard. Just the other day I was talking to a friend of mine, a very famous physicist, who had just gotten the letter from the National Science Foundation ending his grants for his research. And it said, because of anti-Semitism at Harvard, you can't do your research. And he said to me, I'm Jewish. 2 of my 3 collaborators on this project, who are also scientists, are Jewish. And here someone's telling us we can't study black holes because of anti-Semitism on campus. It just makes no sense at all. And that's when you realize that this really is, a Trump special, where he's taking something that is a real issue and then using it as a false flag to go after the university.
Is it appropriate? Is it helpful? Leaving aside the personality of Trump, which I recognize is relevant to the discussion, to single out anti-Semitism as a type of discrimination that deserves preferencing in an environment where we have rule of law, in an environment where we're trying to protect any minority, any identity group, whether it's homosexuals or Muslims or Black people, from facing discrimination. In that environment, do you find it's helpful, harmful, or somewhere in between for so much? And it's not just Trump that's talking about, sort of anti-Semitism as a special grouping that deserves protection.
Well, I think of it in terms of a split screen. On the one hand, the kinds of attacks against Jews that we've seen just in recent months, they did not exist in the United States in a meaningful way for most of the last half century. Many, many synagogues and temples in the United States now have armed guards outside them. And when I was a kid, I remember, backpacking in Europe and being shocked to go to synagogue and see armed guards. It was inconceivable to me that could happen in the United States. So there has been, in that sense, a rise of salient examples of anti-Semitism in the US. And when there's it's not new, but when there's a newly virulent form of hatred, it's worth paying attention to it and giving it sort of an extra nudge. But in principle, I couldn't agree more with what I think is the premise of your question, Ian. Every form of hate deserves the same amount of condemnation. And in the United States, where our really deep structural forms of hatred really do tend to focus much more on race, the United States is still a country where Jews have lived longer with greater safety and greater equality than any other country on earth by an enormous historical margin. You don't want to overemphasize that kind of hatred. It's not appropriate.